Yeah, like you, I wrote letters and I wasn't satisfied with what I got back, and I just thought, you know what, I'm going to get elected. I'm going to do these things because I'm sufficiently irritated about it that I'm going to do that, and I did. I applied. I said it was a Labour government at the time, but I applied and I said I want to be a local councillor. How do I do it? And they said, well, first of all, you're about 40 years younger than everybody else. What the hell's wrong with you? But other than that, they said, well, like, okay, well, you can come down.
Hi, and welcome to the There's Another Way podcast with me, Adam Halverson.
And me, Pete Dolby. And you've come to the place where each episode we'll be shining a light on authentic people who have chosen an alternative path to their new normal to find another way.
Hey everyone. Today we've got a conversation with Christian Harris, entrepreneur, digital marketing expert, and ex-councillor for the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. This conversation goes deep into Christian's journey with the twists and turns in his career, starting in TV, then transitioning into the world of digital, and how he balanced a young family, a hectic career, whilst also navigating the world of politics. This story gives a fascinating insight into both the world of work and life as a public servant, and ultimately it shines a light on what happens when you get fed up of the landscape around you and you decide to take action. Christian is an articulate, passionate guy, and this is a must-have for anyone looking for insights from a fascinating career in the world of local government. We hope you enjoy. There's Another Way. So, Christian, thank you so much for heading over. I would say it's been a while, but we caught up in my garden last week, which then led to us doing this. It's been great to see you twice in as many weeks, I think. I was trying to remember exactly how we first met, and if I'm correct, I think it was at the hospital club. Is that right?
I think it was because thank you for having me, by the way, both of you.
Yeah, great to
guys.
meet you.
It's lovely to be here. Yeah, I think we were in the hospital club, and I said to you, well, I live in this tiny little village in Bucks, you wouldn't know it. And you said, where is it? And I said, well, seriously, you wouldn't know it's near Wickham. And you said, no, seriously, like, where is it? And I said, okay, it's this place called Hewenden Valley. And you said, yeah, I live in Hewenden Valley.
Amazing.
And for people who don't know, Hewenden Valley, it's not a big place. So, it's kind of unusual.
Yeah, I think we got introduced by sort of a mutual contact, didn't we? Who I actually really enjoyed meeting him. And then we met, and it was just like, I guess, curries and catch-ups ever since. And, you know, that. And obviously you live next door to some people that we already knew. So it was, it was fantastic.
Yeah.
But no, and yeah, like you said, thank you so much for coming over. It's great to have you. And look, I mean, I guess in terms of, you know, the usual format here is, you know, it'd be great to understand, you know, what life was growing up. Because actually there's a lot of stuff I don't know, you know, as much as we spent a fair bit of time together, there's a lot of background I don't know. So it'd be great to dig into that if that's okay, and then take it from there. Yeah,
100%. Okay. Well, my name's Christian Harris. I obviously live locally to both of you guys, and in the lovely leafy Buckinghamshire where we're currently living. But I didn't grow up here, unlike you, Adam, you're Bucks born and bred, which I'm not.
Yeah,
don't groan.
Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm still working that one out. Actually,
Ian mentions it on every podcast. There we are.
So I was born in Essex, believe it or not. Yeah, the home of the White Range Rover. So that's where I originally was born, Harlow in Essex, and
my wife was born in Harlow in Essex.
Oh, really?
Strange coincidence.
How funny.
Wow. She hasn't got a white Range Rover.
No, neither do I.
She's got a black one. No, she hasn't. Wow.
There we go. Fantastic.
So that's where I started life. And when I was very small, we moved to Yorkshire, to West Yorkshire. And I lived in a place called Wakefield until I was 13 years old.
So that's even more weird. I went to university for a year in Wakefield. So
whoa, that is random. Yeah. Are you serious right now?
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I had to do this random year in Wakefield. I went to uni in Sheffield. But I was in the Thorn building, I think it was called.
Okay.
Sort of where the athletics track was.
Right.
Yeah, I thought Wakey was great, actually. It was,
Wakey.
Yeah.
Come from Wakey.
Yeah, Wakey.
So that's it. And I went to school there at a place called Queen Elizabeth Grammar School, Quegs, it's commonly known as, which back in the day was, part free, part paid grammar school. All boys. Quite a sort of competitive, rough, tough grammar, northern grammar school. And I was I was a choral scholar. So my fees were paid for by the church. And I spent a lot of time in church as a child because I was a musical child. And it was a long day. I used to do a service after school every single day. So I had 2 hours at the end of every day was in church. I did 3 services on a Sunday, 2 on a Saturday. So probably, good 20, 25 hours a week in church every week from the age of 7 till the age of 13.
Wow. Wow. What were you playing? What was your...
I was a choral scholar. I was a choir
singer.
boy.
Singer.
I was,
Okay.
I was singing in the choir. So I had an unusual existence because when everyone else went home and watched, TV and chilled out, I went to,
Amazing.
a church and sang choral music. So it was an unusual kind of upbringing in that regard. And I grew up in West Yorkshire at a time when it was quite poor. There was the miners' strike. I don't know if you guys remember all of this stuff, but in the 70s and early 80s in West Yorkshire was not the UK was not prosperous like it is today. And it was there was a lot of poverty and a lot of distrust and unhappiness. And I went to the only private school in the whole of Wakefield, and that was going down the bus station with my school uniform on it was like walking running the gauntlet because you really didn't know what was going to happen because there was a lot of antipathy towards private school in that kind of environment where most kids come from sort of mining families and so on. And in fact, I remember I was probably about 10. My mum bought, every year you get your school uniform, and my mum bought me a Queen Elizabeth Grammar School sweatshirt. I'd never owned a sweatshirt before, and it was a black sweatshirt with a big gold logo on the front of it. And she said, "Oh, I got you this." And I thought, wow, that is possibly the most dangerous thing I own. And she said, seriously,
you've just broken my nose for me.
Yeah, literally. And she gave it to me. She said, "Why don't you wear it?" And I could do with you running down to the shops and get me one or two things. We lived in a little village called Walton, which was, near a mining village, and like a lot of places in Yorkshire at that time. And I think I probably got about maybe 50 yards before I got punched.
Oh, God.
But it was definitely a. It's just a sign. The perception was it was a sign of you have a particular type of upbringing, which was not true at all. I mean, we weren't a particularly wealthy family, but at that time, that was very much what it was like. It was it was a challenging place to grow up in that respect.
Did you have to develop coping mechanisms for those scenarios where you thought, hang on, you could sense something coming? Or
I did. I developed an absolutely immaculate Yorkshire accent.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that was the only way to survive. And you had to be able to speak full Yorkshire.
Right.
And if you could just about talk your way out of trouble as a child. But if you couldn't, you were toast. So that was fun. But notwithstanding all of that, I still had a good time, and it was a great school. And we had some really illustrious kind of members of that school. That went on to achieve great things. I'm not one of them, but no, we had a good time. And then when I was 13, we moved to Worcestershire. We moved to the West Midlands, and I went to a very different sort of school. And it was kind of the place which sort of made me, to be honest. The school I went to there, it was much more my kind of vibe, and that's where I spent my teenage years. And I still did a lot of music, but I started kind of phased that out. And I finished there in 1991. And then I had a gap year and I went to Africa.
Wow.
And I worked in the VSO, Voluntary Services Overseas. And I was in Uganda, Tanzania and Kenya. And I was out there for a period. And then came back and went to uni, and I was at Southampton Uni. So you were at Sheffield, you were...
I went to Birmingham, but later on, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I went to Southampton, did philosophy, single honours there. And, that was my uni experience, which was incredibly positive. I had a fantastic time studying that.
Looking back, how impactful, because I'm really interested in this personally, because the gap year really affected my desire to study, I think. If I'd have gone 18, I wouldn't have had any inclination or known what to do. But did you find that gap year helped kind of push you in the right direction, or did you grow from it? And then did it help you when you went to university, make a difference, do you think?
It did, yeah. It did, because I was a very immature 18-year-old. Yeah. I was incredibly naughty. I got into trouble quite a bit as a teenager. And I sort of held it together enough to get my A-levels, but I was definitely, for whatever reason, and I actually don't know the reason, but I was quite a sort of bit wayward at that point in my life, I think. Or not, I know. So I think that gap year was incredibly beneficial, so that by the time I went to university, I was that 1 year older. A lot of people take gap years, don't they? I think it's less popular now, unfortunately. But I could see the difference between people who are 18 and people who are 19. There was it's only a year, but actually you're maturing a lot, especially boys. I think young men at the age of 18 can be kind of mentally quite young, and you look like a man, but actually inside you're kind of a boy, really. And so I think it was hugely beneficial to have that year and to go to Africa with my mate and survive that, out there back then.
What made you choose that? What sort of made you think of doing that?
That's a good question. I wanted to have a gap year. I wanted to have a break. A lot of people it was a popular thing. I think about half of all my friends did take a gap year, and I think I sensed that I needed a break from between school and university and to grow up a bit. And I was just fascinated with seeing Africa. I just thought that would be an amazing and unique experience. And, I imagined it was going to be like Born Free, but this amazing to see the Serengeti, and to see what that actually looks like. It's one of the most extraordinary places on earth.
Yeah, incredible. No, it's just, I suppose the done thing was Thailand and full moon party and that was sort of what seemed to happen in sort of my school. Everyone went away, came back with baggy trousers and sort of silly hair and these weird beads, and pretty quickly got ripped the piss out of who do you think you are? But choosing Africa is a really interesting one, because I think a lot of people wouldn't have the kind of balls to do it as well.
Right. Yeah. No, maybe that's true. Yeah. No, we had a fantastic time. I toured around a lot, all around Lake Victoria and into the central parts of Kenya and Uganda. We went all the way up the coast, right to Somalia and back. There's some dangerous places out there, and you've got to be kind of aware of who you are and what you're doing and where you're going and manage all of that. But it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Definitely recommend it to anybody. And you have to become quite self-sufficient, because you can't rely on there always being services around you. It's Africa, there aren't always services, but actually people are incredibly kind and gracious and would help you if you needed help, even though they don't really have anything much themselves. But I'd never really seen poverty like that until I went to Africa. It was having grown up relatively sort of sheltered life to then go to places like that at that point was quite revealing. And
I can imagine.
It really was. I remember there's a lot of aid comes into East Africa from the United States. food aid programs come in through the ports over there, and I remember watching the bags of rice coming in because there was already significant famine challenges, and there had been throughout the 80s, as you'll maybe know, the Ethiopian famine that they had further north than that. And those bags of rice were just being sold. They were supposed to be handed out, but it was so corrupt that they were passed out, and then people were bidding on them to buy them. So they never made, almost none of the aid made it to the people who were actually starving, because it was just being traded as a tradable goods, if that makes sense. So actually, when you sort of see that going on as a young person, it has quite an impression on you, because you realise that actually you don't solve things just with money or with aid, because actually most of that aid's never going to reach. Along the way, the shrinkage on that aid is going to reduce so dramatically, because the governance isn't there to actually make sure that makes it to the people who are starving. It's really it was a really extraordinary thing watching that happen. Yeah,
that's awful. Yeah.
And so, but it gave you a good break, gave you a good gap, and then into university, and at Southampton. I don't know it that well, but I've been there a few times. It's a good place.
Wonderful. I really recommend it to anybody. I had a fantastic time. One of my lecturers is a guy called Ray Monk, who is quite an illustrious philosopher. He writes for The Guardian, and he's written a lot of books. And he's made a couple of films as well. And he was my tutor. So I had a really inspiring tutor that really challenged me to think. Yeah. And so I had they had some really great, I had a really great crop of lecturers there at the time I was there. I was really fortunate to do that, and really inspired me to want to be an academic, which I nearly did. And if I'd got a first, I probably would have done, but I didn't get a first. I got a 2-1, so I didn't kind of go down that route, but I flirted with it because I really enjoyed it.
What was it that made you choose that subject?
Because I think don't we all want to know the meaning of life? I mean, don't we all want to understand on a deeper level why we're here and what our purpose is? And I'm no different to anybody else in that respect. I think it's a sort of, for me anyway, those are questions I wanted to answer, already as a young person, and I was really fascinated by some of those topics, and the fact that some incredibly brilliant and intelligent people had dedicated their entire lives to trying to answer these fundamental questions about why we're here and what our purpose is.
And was this tied into, because you mentioned with the choir and the church, was it were you a religious family, or? My
family is a very religious family. I am not a religious person at all.
Okay.
No, I'm a real rationalist.
Okay, so the philosophy wasn't sort of connected to that. It was sort of.
No, I think it was.
Yeah,
I think it was triggered, because if you grow up with a lot of religiosity around you, and I spent a lot of my childhood in churches all over the world. I mean, we toured and made records and everything when I was a choir boy, but you're like surrounded by that atmosphere of the Bible and the teachings of the Bible and religious people and priests and that environment. And as a child, of course, you just swallow it because you're not old enough to critique those kinds of things. But when you get a bit older, you start asking questions. Is this really genuine? Is this really real? Is this intangible thing that you keep talking about called God actually, how do I kind of prove its existence? And that leads you quite neatly into philosophical questions. And I'm thinking this for the first time, by the way. I haven't actually had this thought before until you asked me this question. But I think that probably is the reason why I was attracted to want to do something like that, because I'd spent a lot of time in my own head, sat through probably literally thousands of sermons, sat in the stalls in the choir, listening to and thinking about these big topics. But no, both my sister and I are not religious in any way, and I definitely I understand why people are, and I respect that. And I actually really like visiting churches, and I like going to church even. But I'm not because I believe in God. That's not something that I can or ever will do.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's. I'm a bit the same, actually. I enjoy. I really sort of feel comfortable and respect churches, but it's not my thing. I'm not a practicing Christian or anything like that. But I know what you mean. But I'm also fascinated on the sort of, you were going to go down the academics route and that sort of, so obviously I'm guessing, because don't get me wrong, I got a decent degree and everything like that, but I didn't take it overly seriously. But it sounds like you sort of went to Southampton, which I think is a red brick, isn't it? Anyway, is it one of the sort of more established ones? I don't know if it is, but
yeah, it is.
Yeah, it is. But you obviously kind of were pretty intentional with what you were doing there, and took it seriously and wanted to take it further.
Yeah. My dad gave me Bertrand Russell's Problems of Philosophy when I was about 17, and he said, "Why don't you have a look at this? It's a great book for anybody interested in just trying to get their head around the basics of philosophy." He wrote it. It's like literally 50 pages. It's just, you could read it in an afternoon. But embedded in that short book were not the answers, but the big questions that philosophy tries to answer. And Bertrand Russell, obviously incredibly a capable philosopher, and wrote many books himself. But that piqued my interest, and that made me want to understand more, and I became, and then I read A.J. Ayer's Language, Truth and Logic, and that then I got more into it, and and I, like, by the time I got to university, I'd actually read quite a few books and was really ready to kind of go for it. And but I didn't quite make it first. I was just marginally not quite there, not quite at that level. I just missed it. So, and I think that just made me think maybe I'm not that good. Maybe I'm good, but I'm not quite, academic enough to really, because the 1 or 2 people did get first. So it's like, okay, well, they're obviously better than me, maybe whatever. And I think there was also a draw to kind of go into commercial world, and to actually, because it is an ivory tower. A university is quite an odd place in some ways. You're sort of almost outside society. You're not really, you're kind of partly in the real world, but you're also partly not. I mean, I've got a very close friend of mine is a professor in Liverpool University right now, and if you listen to him and spend any time with him, it's clear that he's a bit slightly disengaged from the day-to-day realities of life, because he doesn't need to be, because that's not the world he occupies, and that's cool. But I remember thinking, looking at those lectures, do I want to be that person in 20 years or 30 years? Is that what I want to be, or do I want to be more participatory? So there was also that. So it's kind of two sides to it, but I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend philosophy to anybody, even though obviously it doesn't naturally lead to a job.
Yeah, I guess
such.
It's not an obvious career path, is it, as such?
No, it's really not. A lot of people who do philosophy end up in media, though. So that seems to be quite a kind of common. But then I finished there, and then I drifted about for about a year, and then I ended up working in radio. Just got my first job in radio in a local radio station. And then I moved from radio to television in Birmingham, and then I moved from Birmingham to Manchester, and I worked at Granada TV in the 90s for 4 years. And
what was your first job in radio? What got you a foot in the door then with the radio stuff?
My mum knew the station manager of BBC Hereford and Worcester,
right?
And they had mat leave. They needed mat leave cover,
okay.
And so they used to send me out into the town to do things called vox pops, where you go and interview people on the street with an enormous thing called a Uher, UHER, which is a massively heavy open reel, like tape, recording thing that I had to walk around. It was like a satchel. It was unbelievably heavy. I'm not joking. It must have weighed, I don't know, kilos, this thing. And I had to walk around and go and ask people, like today I would have been out asking about the election, have you voted? Which way would you vote? Are you happy with the government? No. Why? That kind of stuff. Yeah, so I used to do that. It was great. It was great fun.
And then from there you went into TV.
Yeah. Yeah, did 4 years at Granada TV, started at the bottom pretty much as a runner. And then I managed to get onto a kind of graduate program there, which then there was about 6 or 7 of us, and we got a chance to work on all the different types of TV. So we did factual news, entertainment, current affairs. We did about 5 or 6 different genres of TV as it was back then. Drama, did some drama. And Granada was a big producer of shows. And for whatever reason I can't explain, I ended up on the top floor of Key Street in Manchester doing light entertainment. And I became the light entertainment kind of one out of that group. And I did all the Saturday night and Friday night shows. So I did all the Stars in Their Eyes and You've Been Framed and University Challenge and quite a few pilots and things like that. So I did Ellie most of that time. Yeah.
Sorry, what capacity were you in on those shows? Were you behind the scenes or?
I was. Like I said, I started out very low, making the tea.
Yeah.
By the time I left, I was an assistant producer.
Okay.
So over 4 years, I went up sort of 2 or 3 notches and was producing the shows and going out directing. What they called VT inserts, which is when they go on location and film something happening in someone's home or in the street or in a school or wherever, and then they cut that into the show that's actually a studio-based show. Yeah. So I used to direct and cut those, and they'd be inserted into the show. Brilliant. Yeah.
And actually, fun. And it sounds like quite a fast rise. You see,
I was lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. We won a lot of commissions, and so everybody was rising up the ranks. I think it wasn't sort of unique to me. And if you're good and you work hard, you can go up very quickly and so on. But I had some major challenges because a lot of the other people, young people who were joining around that time, they'd all been to Bournemouth, and Bournemouth has an incredibly good production and media degree. They probably still do, but they definitely did then. And they were the kind of the main place that people went to do the degree. So they walked in and they were like, they could do everything. And I walked in and they said, could you light the set? And I was like, nope. Could you edit this script? Nope, can't do that either. Could you just set up these camera angles and make sure that we've got, the tripods and the cameras are white balanced and ready and focused? Can't do that either, actually, to be honest with you. So I literally, every single tiny thing I had to learn and learn and learn and learn. But I got there, and picked it up. And there's no better way than just learning by doing.
Hands-on.
Yeah, just pick the bloody camera up and start doing stuff, and you figure it out. And people were very kind and helped me and showed me how to do things. And it's not that hard.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So I had a great time. It was a really good experience. And then just at the end of my time there, I set up Channel M, which was a local TV station for Manchester at a time when the government wanted to create city-wide TV stations like they have in the US. Like in Chicago, they've got their own TV station, which is just Chicago, and they've got the same in, Michigan, and they've got the same in New York, and they wanted to do the same thing. And we created a Manchester TV station called Channel M. And that was a great experience. I'd never done anything like that before. And we had a contract with the Manchester Giants to do the basketball and things like that. So we covered quite a lot of local sports. And so I sort of, ice hockey we used to do. I learned a lot about some of these niche sports that I didn't know. And that was the end. Then I moved to Manchester, and the rest of my career has been in digital in various guises. But the Manchester experience was a really powerful one for me because I made some fantastic friends. I had a shared house, and had made some great, some wonderful friends who I'm still close to now, and learnt to drink lager like they drink in the north of England, which is very different to how we drink down here in the south, and and just it's a buzzing city. If you've ever spent any time in Manchester, it's a real young person's city. There's a lot going on. It's incredible nightlife, and I played in a band. I was a bass player, and so I got to see that side of the city. Like the live music scene as it was at that time. And
what sort of time was this? Where
96 to 2000
That's a really great time
for music.
Yeah,
oh my god, yeah.
90s were incredible.
Yeah, in Manchester specifically.
Oh, it was the best. I was a bit afterwards. I played a lot of gigs in Manchester, sort of 2002, 3 to 5, 6, I think. Something like that. Yeah.
Well, you were playing in a band?
Yeah.
What were you playing? Oh, drums. I knew that.
Yeah,
I knew that about you.
And I did know you played the bass, actually. I was going to say I didn't know that, but then I was like, no, I did.
Yeah.
But I didn't know it was in Manchester. So you probably would have played a lot of the same
places. Like Sankey Soaps and Band on the Wall and all that.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Was Jabez Clegg one of them? Was that
there? Yeah, that was there.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, that was on Oxford Road, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember.
Exactly.
They had a slightly raised area at the back for where the bands played. Yeah, I remember that.
So that was a good time. The band, being in the band. Did you play in the big gigs or support anyone? Or
we never quite got. We did record a few songs in a studio when we never got kind of that big. I mean. I think our biggest ever night was maybe, 200 people or something. So we had a bit of a following, like people knew who we were.
Yeah.
There's a I don't know if it's like this now, but back then the promoters of the gig would make you sign something which said we will not play a gig something like 3-4 weeks either side of this date, so that the following that you do have will all come to that one gig, so they get the bar sales. So in order to play more gigs than that, we had multiple names, so that we could play as often as we liked, and we just rename ourselves the following week. So no, we're not Rise anymore with this, we're not this anymore with this. The only problem with that is that no one knew who the hell we were. Like, what's your name this week? so we used to kind of keep renaming ourselves, but
like naming a tropical storm or something.
Yeah, we used to get. We used to say, oh no, we're not those guys, with these guys, but it was a very sort of indie pop type sound. I still have the CD somewhere, but we had some good tunes, and we had so much fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an incredible buzz and a real laugh to be on stage in front of people playing music that you've written. I mean, that's a pretty cool thing to do, the only problem with the band was that because my career was starting to pick up, I wasn't taking it quite as seriously as everyone else. They really wanted to make it big. For them, they wanted to be, the next Oasis. Whereas for me, I just wanted to, play my bass and have a laugh and, go and do these gigs and so on. And so I think it got to a certain point where, they wanted something more from it than maybe I did, and if they're out there now listening to this, maybe they will one day. Then I'm sorry that I didn't take it more seriously. Yeah. But it was it was a wonderful experience, and
it's funny actually. I was the same. I would say that we all wanted it to work, but I think I had this, and it sounds like you did as well. It felt that there was a direction pulling me away from it, and it was one of those where it was a case of, unless this was really obvious that it's going to go somewhere and we're all intentional about it and we're going to do what it takes, I've kind of got other stuff to do. I kind of very much had that pull.
Yeah, and working in TV, this was before the working time directive, so I used to work 7 days a week. Quite often when we had pilot shows and we had production was on, you'd work literally Monday to Sunday, and my largest number ever I remember distinctly was 69 days without a day off. So I did, it was relentless working in TV production, which I didn't mind at all. I loved it. I was very happy working 7 days a week, no problem. But it was quite exclusive. It's hard to have a serious hobby on the side, like what people now would call a side hustle, as well as that, because you're just literally doing TV all day, every single day, and it's quite onerous. But I mean, I'm sure it's not like that anymore. But back then it was a lot of hours, so it was a bit of a conflict. But I wouldn't change it. I really enjoyed it.
And so what was it that sort of got you out of that? Because obviously you said 4 years. Was that Granada and Channel M? Or
yeah.
So,
the last 6 months was the Channel M setup.
Okay. So what kind of moved you on then? So why?
I was lucky enough to get headhunted into a job in London. they wanted somebody, because I'd worked on a lot of TV shows targeting a younger audience, and I'd written a format that had got commissioned, a one-off on Channel 4, and so I made a bit of a name for myself, or a reputation for myself, as kind of creating content for like the sort of 16 to 24 market. And I don't know how much you know about the way TV works, but it's highly segmented how they target specific audiences, because that's how they sell the advertising around those shows, and on a day part basis. And programmatic, digital marketing still works in much the same way. But because of that, I got a job in a digital business that wanted to target that audience, and they said, we want somebody that really knows that audience and is familiar with it. And at that point I was not much older than that myself. I would have been 25 or 26 or whatever. So I could legitimately say, look, I live and breathe that audience. I can absolutely help you to build digital products and services for that type of customer. And that's what I moved to London to do. It was a real sort of Jack Turpin, pack up my knapsack and go to London, and leave the northwest and go to the city. But it was incredibly exciting. And London at that point, it was a new millennium and everything. It was a wonderful experience to do that. And I went to a very well-funded startup to do mobile content, actually, and mobile technology, which is very early. It was pre-app. So if you think it's pre-2007, pre-Steve Jobs, pre-iPhone.
Sort of J2ME stuff.
Not even
that. I was going to say it's actually even before.
Text.
Yeah.
There was products using text messaging. So it was a real UI challenge to do anything more complex. Of course, it moved into that after a certain point, and WAP, if you remember WAP.
Yeah, I do.
So that was my kind of big break, really, and that was the first sort of more corporate. It was really funny when there was just some basic things that I'd never done. When they said, "Could you write a PowerPoint about this?" and I literally never used PowerPoint. Never done it, because in TV that's just not. You've got a visual medium you work with every day. It's TV. You don't need PowerPoint. We make content on the big screen, but the learning how to operate in an office. It was really kind of a new experience to be sat in front of a computer all day, and I'd never known that, because I've always been out making TV on the road, and going places. So no, that was how my move to London started, and that was a Finnish company, and I didn't know then what an impact it was going to have on my life, but I was there for 2 years, and I left there to work for one of our suppliers, a research and design business based in Helsinki, and that's where I moved to. I left London and moved to Finland, and that's where I met my wife.
Right.
Yeah. So it's been that was really that experience of working with people from Scandinavia has had a really profound impact on my whole life, because my children are bilingual. We have a second home there now. We spend a lot of time there, and that's had a really significant cultural influence on on my outlook, really, I guess.
Well, you worked with a Finnish company and spent some time with it. My wife and I had a Finnish roommate at university, so we've been over to the wedding. They live in the north, in Oulu. The Arctic Circle. And learnt all the Finnish swear words when we lived with her. So it's quite an unusual language, isn't it? But yeah, it's great. I spent a bit of time over there, and they're super nice. So yeah.
What did you make of it culturally? How did you find them as people?
She was great. We're still very much in touch today, and we get on like a house on fire. We always pick up where we left off. She's amazing. So quite different to we had a lot of Norwegian friends as well. Spent some time over there, and I love it over there, but quite different. I love that part of the world. Yeah.
And I'm just trying to think, when we first met, was it around this time? Because obviously I was working for a Finnish mobile tech company, and I'm guessing that's where our connection came from. But I'm wondering if that is when. Yeah, maybe it was.
It might have been,
because I was with that company from 2000 and when was it? 2008 to 12, I think.
Okay, that must have been after I'd come back.
Okay.
After I'd moved back to the UK, because we lived abroad for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I came back in 2005.
Okay. No, I mean, just from my side, just quickly on the Helsinki, and I think it's a wonderful place. And I think the people are incredible. Like, you know, it's kind of quirky, you know, and like the men crack me up. I remember being in a nightclub once, and I, as the Finns do, you know, shoved a lot of vodka down my neck. And I remember talking to this. I was already married by this point, so Kat, if you're listening, I wasn't flirting with anyone. But I remember talking to this girl who was part of our party, and I was just like, why are all these men just standing around but not doing anything? And she was like, oh, that's just what Finnish men do. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, no, Finnish men don't talk to women. So it's like, you could make a killing here. I was like, well, I'm married. But she's like, you could make a killing here if you just talk to women. And
Did you have a shirt on at the time?
That's an in-joke.
In-joke. Love that. I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah. But it was fascinating. And they're great people. Like, and their language, because obviously
the language is interesting.
Because they use sort of order of words, don't they, to sort of accent things. So that's why they sound very monotone, because they don't sort of accent the tone. It's more done in the ordering and the shaping of the sentence, is my understanding. But it's incredibly hard to learn. Do you speak Finnish?
I do.
No way.
Yeah, yes way.
Mitä kuuluu?
Hyvin kiitos. Ja sinua?
Hyvä kiitos. Minun nimeni on Pete. And then all the swear words after that.
Okay.
Vito, remember that one?
Yeah, that's quite a bad one.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. We'll edit that out.
Yeah. But that's
Perkele is one of those things.
Perkele, not
Yeah.
boy.
Helvetti.
Yeah.
That's amazing, because I knew a guy who was a very, very smart consultant who was working with us. I think he was an Accenture guy. And he'd lived there for 5 years, and he was still really struggling with the language. But I
went to school.
You went to school?
In St Albans, yeah.
Oh, really?
For about 5 years, yeah, every Saturday.
Wow.
Yeah. We, as a family, we went, you know, but the children went, and we you know, so it was a kind of cultural thing for them, but for me, it was like hardcore lessons every Saturday morning, for many years. Yeah. It helped a lot. It clicked with me at a certain point, because it's the construction, without wanting to go too deep into it, it's the construction of it. Once you get that, actually it becomes much, much easier, because there's no articles and there's no prepositions. So, for example, I go to the car, 5 words. In Finnish, 2 words. Menen autolle. Auto is the word for car. Le means I'm going to the car. And I don't have to say minä. I can just say menen, because minä is clear from the declined version of mennä, which is the verb to go. So mennään autolle tells all of those things in 2 words that we need 5 in English to say. So once you get your head around that, okay, so there's no prepositions, there's no to, from, in, by, with, of, you know, and there's also no a or the or an. So you've been all of that lot. And then it's like, okay, now it's like literally from the many to the few, you know, and also, of course, it's phonetic. So if you have it written, you know immediately exactly how to say it. It's not like the English where you know, it's totally baffling to foreigners. Why is Leicester not Leicester? Yeah. You know, why is Worcester not Worcester? You know, it's like totally confusing.
It's like the Americans say, isn't it? Worcestershire.
Worcestershire. Yeah. And I don't blame them for that.
Yeah.
Blame them for a lot of things, but not that.
Exactly.
But in all seriousness, it's just like, it's that pain barrier. If you get over the pain barrier, then you... And also the compound nouns, of course, because you can just bolt nouns together and they just get longer and longer, like German. So you can have nouns of, you know, might have 10 words within 1 word, you know.
That's very impressive, because you don't meet many people that can speak
fascinating. And was it just something that was it important to your wife, or was it something you wanted to do for her, or was it just sort of...
So 2 reasons. Both my grandparents don't speak any English. Like, when I say no English, I mean, like, literally not a single word, not like hello or goodbye, nothing. So if I want to have a relationship with them, then I need to do that. But we follow the Opal method at home, which is one parent, one language. So my wife only ever speaks Finnish to my children, and they only ever speak Finnish back to her, and I only ever speak English, and they only ever speak English back to me. So at the dinner table, we will go backwards and forwards between languages maybe 20 times in a meal.
Wow.
So, and very strictly, still today, to this day. So that means that if I want to understand what she's saying and what they're answering, then I have to speak her language, or at least understand it, so I can follow the conversation. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to follow.
What an amazing thing for your kids as well. Just
incredible. And they really are bilingual. It's funny because when they were small, this is an aside, obviously, but when they were small, the schools that they went to in this country said, well, obviously their English is probably going to develop quite late because, they're bilingual, they're trying to learn two languages. So the total bullshit, excuse my French, but that's just not true. I mean, a child can learn probably more than two languages at the same pace as a child that learns one. Their brains at that age, they pick it up very, very quickly. And Elsa, our oldest, I mean, she was fully speaking fluent English and Finnish at the age of 2.5. No problem, absolutely no problem. Very verbal child. So it's a bit of it's not quite true, really. I think what a lot of schools think about bilingualism in this country.
It's always amazed me. I think generally the kids don't start a second language here until maybe 10 or 11. I think they have brought it down a little bit. And in Europe and the rest of the countries, they start much earlier. It's always astounded me that they don't do that much earlier, I think.
I think it's dying. Yeah. I mean, if the school my children go to, Wickham High in Wickham, obviously, there's very few children doing A-level modern languages at A-level. And I mean, partly it's because it's hard. It's hard. It is difficult to do German A-level. I did German A-level, and it's demanding. But you will never truly understand another culture unless you speak the language ever. Oh, yeah. So it's a huge mistake to. If you're interested in intercultural communication, it's a huge mistake to believe that you can just visit somewhere and wander around and then come back and think, I've got that. I understand that country.
You're very good at always making sure you pick up some good phrases, and it's a really admirable skill. Actually, it's not. I'm a typical Brit. I've really got to start getting better at that. Because it just changes everything, doesn't it?
Oh. Yeah.
I think even if it's just a hello or how are you, and I think that breaks the ice. I've worked in France a few times and heard British families descend on a shop or wherever and just shout at English. It's just horrifying.
Yeah.
But you've put me to shame because my wife speaks fluent German because she's schooled in Germany, and our intention originally was to bring the kids up bilingually, and we weren't as disciplined as you. So well done, kudos to you for doing that, because I know it's not easy.
It's not. It's actually not as hard as you think, but you just have to be really resolute about it. But the only downer to it is that when you get home from work and you're absolutely dog tired, and then you're trying to follow. You've done a 12-hour day, and then there's a very fast-paced conversation at the dinner table when you're hanging in there anyway, just about, and you've had a real sort of hatful of challenges at work that day, and then you're trying to follow a really intense conversation in Finnish. It's like, guys, could you just be merciful? It's like, help me out here, I'm exhausted.
In those situations, you find a salmiakki vodka helps.
No, but it's amazing. I mean, this is what I love about the podcast is, people can hear the experience that you've gone through, and that it is possible. I'm sitting here, and this is what I have with a lot of these conversations. I'm like, why didn't I do that? Obviously, all right, my wife's English, I'm English, so but I've got Norwegian heritage, and it does make you just think. Like I hope someone's listening to this, and with their 2-year-old or whatever, just be like, just do it. Just imagine what it will give them, and you don't get that chance. I mean, my kids are 11 and 14, and it's like that's done. Like, it's too late now, and I think anyway. I'm sure it is. And it's like Ella's really good at Spanish, at least at school, but she's like, no, I'm not interested. I'm like, you love Barcelona. What are you talking about? If you're good at it, I think she was told she was like second best in the year, and I was just like, what do you mean? And again, it's that she knows it's just going to get difficult, and it's a shame because it's it's such an opportunity, and your brain can't do it, it can do it, but it's a lot harder, isn't it, when you get older?
I definitely it's harder, but it's never too late. And what helped me a lot was living. I lived there for a period of time, and I made a point of trying to practice a bit like yourself, Pete. And you take the opportunity to try and speak language. The only challenge with that was I found that the Finnish people wanted to practice their English, of course. So they'd you're English, great. I want to,
And obviously they're all very good at it.
Yeah. They're very good at it, especially our generation and younger. The older generation are more likely to have learned Russian than English because, of course, it's proximity to Russia and so on. But
they obviously love the Russians as well.
Oh my God, yeah, it's a really. It's crazy what's going on over there at the moment. I mean, where our flat is on the Russian border, right by the border. It's literally, you could swim there through the Samar Lake across the border and swim to Russia. So it's very, very near. And it's become the front line, because they joined NATO. So and there's a lot of, not nervousness, I think, in that country. They've got a 1,200 kilometre land border, and there's no physical border. They've got lasers and watchtowers and stuff, but you can walk, literally just physically walk across it. Anyway, I digress. But yeah, so Finland's had a big impact on my life. Yeah, and I was interested. The reason why I asked you the question about your cultural perception is because I worked for Finnish companies. I worked for two of them, and I actually found it quite an adjustment with the directness. As British people, we're very tuned into what is rudeness, and how you behave, and how you learn how to talk to people, how to look at them, and how to address them, and how to listen. And Brits good at that. We're very good at that. Whereas the Finns are absolutely the unvarnished truth from the first thing in the morning to the last thing at night, sober or drunk, doesn't matter. You're going to get the absolute, total, completely honest. And even in my marriage, I've had to could you just sugarcoat it a little bit? Does it have to be, the absolute kind of blah? But they don't, and that's a cultural difference between them and us. They just don't. It's just straightforward all the way, and actually, once you get used to it and you appreciate that, there's a lot of value in it.
I loved it.
Okay, there you go.
I loved it. I went from working with Finns to working with Swedes, and they're very different. The Swedes, I hope the Swedish people that I absolutely loved working for, if they're listening, but they really struggle with conflict, and they really struggle with directness, and it sort of comes across a little bit passive aggressive, and it's not, but it's the complete, I wouldn't say it's the complete opposite, because they are also quite direct, but I loved working with the Finns because it just taught me there's no malice in it. There's nothing. Nothing unpleasant about it. It's just you've got to be able to handle the truth and learn to give the truth back. And I mean, I remember sitting down with my CEO many times, just thinking, that was brutal. and it's also but I know where I stand. But it was. You're absolutely right. It's a real adjustment, and you can't. I think it's great for the Brits to experience that. Because it's just.
We could do with a bit of that.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I was in a lift with Finnish people, and I as a typical Brit, I tried to fill the silences and said, a few seconds would go by, and like, God, weather's shocking today, isn't it? Or something. And they'd look at me quizzically and why do you feel the need to speak in the lift? There's absolutely no one's interested, and you really don't need to bother. But we as British people, we have this compulsion to, it's become these awkward silences. If it lasts more than 4 or 5 seconds, it's like, God, I've got to say something.
You do well to last 4 or 5 seconds. I think I'm less than that, but it's funny. So, but the cultural differences in a working environment are really interesting. And I've got a half German wife, so
okay.
I get a 50% of the. I could do with a little bit more sugar coating, but Germans are very direct as well. There's no grey. It's black or white.
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't say it's that in the manual. It doesn't happen.
Right, right. That's interesting. Did she grow up in Germany or
half and half? So until she was 10, she grew up in the UK and then Harlow, Essex. Then she moved. It wasn't there for long, and then moved to Germany for 10 years, and then we met working in America a long time ago. So.
And is she a German citizen or
no? She's British. Yeah.
Does she does she feel like a German, like in her attitudes and the way she thinks? And
I would say not, but she's more British. I think she wanted to try and keep dual citizenship, but they had to choose, so she had to choose.
Oh, they don't allow the dual.
No.
Because the Finns do. My kids have got both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She points it out sometimes. It's not fair, but yeah, she had to choose, so she went for the British. But interestingly, when we worked in America, we were representing the UK, so she could have chosen Germany or the UK to represent when she was over there, and she chose the UK.
What were you representing?
The UK. Well, we both worked in Disney World in the Epcot Centre, and they've got countries around the lagoon, like 100 people working in each, and we worked in the British Pavilion, so she could have chosen to work in the German Pavilion if she wanted to, but by that point she'd had enough and wanted to.
That's really funny. My wife worked in Disneyland in Paris.
Well, we worked in Disneyland Paris. After we did that, we came back and we worked for a summer in Disneyland Paris.
Oh, no kidding. One of my kids wants to go and do that in the summer break because there's a lot of people from all over the world go and.
So when was your wife there?
When?
You remember? Or what did she? Yeah.
Do you know what? I can't answer that question. At some point in the 90s.
We were late 98. The summer of we worked there, in the hotel.
She worked. I know she worked on Le Main Gate because she joked about Le Main Gate and how she was called Le Main Gate. So she was right at the front entrance somewhere doing something.
Find out when we were there if there's a crossover.
No, it may well have been. But in fact, weirdly, she's going to Berlin tomorrow and she's going to stay with a German friend of hers who she met at Disneyland in Paris. His name is Ulrich. She was talking to me about it tonight just before I left. So she's got lots of friends from her Disneyland. Paris, like literally, I'm not joking. She's got like multiple friends around Europe that she met and she stayed in touch with for all these 20 odd plus years since then.
So this is really strange because we do as well. We're in touch with all the people. 28 years ago, we met in Florida, but because my wife and I met out there, my sister subsequently went and did a year over there. A couple of years after we did. But the reason I'm telling you this is because last week or 2 weeks ago. For the first time, she's got younger kids. They're a lot younger than ours. She went to Berlin to visit her German roommate from the cruise lines, Svenja, in Berlin.
Yeah, how weird.
It's the first trip she'd done in years, and she went over to Berlin,
Yeah.
Small world.
Yeah, no, it's she met loads of friends from all over the place, and we have visited many of them in all different corners of Europe.
And I'm pushing. Keep saying to my kids, you have to go and do something like this because we've got a network of people from all over, and because we delayed going to university, all the university friends we met, including our lovely friend from Finland, we were 21, 22. So there's a push for the UK for them to go at 18, but all the international lot were the same age as us. So all our friends were from Norway, Israel, Finland.
Yeah, same.
So that university was fantastic. But then, like you say, in Paris and Florida as well, we've got a real international network, which is amazing.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. I think that's a great thing for a young person to do.
Yeah, how strange.
Superb. Well, I had no idea you had a place in Finland. That's super cool.
Oh, it's just a small little flat lock and leave type thing.
Yeah, amazing.
But we've had it because, honestly, the reason why, and this is another one of these cultural differences, but Finnish family homes don't have a spare room. If let's say you're a family of four, you'd have the room that you and your partner would sleep in together, and each child would have a room. So you'd have 3-bedroom house. They never ever have anything they don't need.
The sauna.
There's a sauna, next to the shower room and the thing. But there's the reason why I'm telling you this is because when we used to obviously go there a lot to visit her family, we'd always be on the couch because there's never a spare room. Like most English homes, you'd have, your room, the kids, whatever. And then there's this other room, which is mostly empty, that has a bed in it. Or maybe you use it as an office some of the time or whatever. Like this room, for example, that we're in right now. So we're always on sofas. And after a few years, I just absolutely threw my toys out of the pram and said, I'm not doing this anymore. I just cannot sofa surf in this country with your family, lovely as they are. But like, you know, you'd be waking up and someone sort of stepping over you to make porridge or something.
It's totally true.
Like,
It's totally true. And I used to stay with work people. You're absolutely right. It's like, why am I on the floor?
yeah. It's not. It's a weird Anglo-Saxon thing to have this extra room, right? And they don't have it. And so at some point, so we bought a cheap. I mean, the property there is nothing like as expensive as it is here. It'd be like the price of a luxury car. You know what I mean? You can buy a flat there. And so we bought a place 10 years ago, and we've had it ever since. And it's just a one-bed.
That's super cool.
Yeah,
Really cool. Because my old CEO, great guy, a guy called Tuomo, he was really wealthy, but he had a proper summer house. He had like, you know, really unbelievable summer house, and I forget where it was. And it's quite amusing saying a summer house in Finland because it's like, is the weather ever really that good?
Yeah.
But actually, the summers are beautiful.
They've had a hot summer this year. It's been baking for... Well, they don't have a spring, you see. So it goes from... I mean, we had Finns staying with us in May. And one of them said, you know, on the 1st of May I was skiing. On the last day of May I was swimming in the lake.
Crazy.
And in 1 month it went from like metre deep snow to lakes warm enough to swim in.
But boy, do they hate the winter. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, it was hard going there because it was just, everyone was so miserable.
Yeah, well, it's so dark.
So dark.
You get a slight. We went in the winter a couple of times, and you get a little bit of light at 10:30. It's dusky, and then 2:30 it's gone. Isn't it? And that was it.
Well, they have these things called bright lights that they wake up with. I don't know if you've seen them. They're about normally about half a metre high. You have them next to your bed, and it slowly it mimics the dawn basically, and gives your brain and your endorphins a sort of sense of like the day starting. And
season affective disorder, I think, isn't it? Is
That helps. I think it's supposed to help. It's a lot of it gives you a big UV hit first thing in the morning to make you sort of get up. But I really do think that is a massive challenge. The climate. I not so much the cold. I can deal with the cold. Cold's, you know, you just put more clothes on, and the clothes nowadays are so good. But I think the lack of light would. I mean, it's a bit dark, but they do have an incredibly high suicide rate in Finland. I mean, it's incredibly high, and I'm not saying that that's the reason, but that's got to be a factor, I think.
I remember before we took the kids to Oulu, we went to Oulu and then we drove up to the north, so we did a day skiing, and then went to Rovaniemi as well, which is incredible. Yeah. Before we were going over there, I kept checking the weather on my iPhone. Oulu, minus 24, minus 28. Jesus, it's going to be freezing. We have to make sure we're laid up. The kids are young. We don't want them to get too cold. We got there. It was -1 the whole time we were there. I realised there's another Oulu somewhere in North America, I think, or Canada. It was absolutely freezing there.
Seriously?
Geared up for the wrong Oulu, which is
okay.
But
it can be really cold.
It can be that. I mean, I've been to I went to Finnish Lapland, and it was minus 25 at least, and you walk into that with some wind. I mean, your clothes freeze. I mean, But no, it really makes me want to go back. Actually, I think it's a really, really interesting place and really unique. And Helsinki itself. I mean, I know it really well. I can picture it. And there was this great sports bar that I always used to end up in that was just fantastic. Just a bunch of like really huge Finnish men just watching ice hockey. I'm like, yeah, this is cool.
This is what we want.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm conscious we need to get back onto your path. So Finnish tech company. And you moved there as well.
I went to live there. Yeah, I went to live there, it's a random story. Like a lot of things in life, it's a chance thing. But on my first day was my wife's last day, and we went there at this. My first day was a summer party. Every Finnish company has a summer party, and it's the day it's called Vappu, Labour Day. We don't have a Labour Day in this country really, but a lot of countries do, and on that day the company's like, right, everyone down tools, we're going to party, we're going to drink, we're going to have fun, we're going to go out, we're going to have a laugh, we're going to, the whole day we laid on for everybody, and all Finnish companies do this. Is absolutely standard. It's mayhem in Helsinki downtown area on that day, I can tell you. But anyway, and that was my first day, and I don't know why, but I had a T-shirt on which said porn star. and on my first day as a consultant in this company, and my wife saw that and has been disappointed ever since. No, she hasn't been disappointed. She's been pleasantly surprised.
Just very quickly, the company that I work for, funnily enough, one of their largest customers was Hustler Finland, which
really
is stories for other day. Let's just
That's
say
the other podcast.
Let's just say I got to know some porn stars quite well, not intimately well, but.
That must have been interesting as a client.
It was nuts. Excuse the pun, but it was no. So our office was in this awesome building in the middle of Helsinki, and then next door was Hustler, and
Wow.
so I'd walk in, say hi to the guys, and they'd all just be editing porn. It was just like, this is crazy. It was obviously as it was all transitioning from magazines into online and DVDs, and it was. Yeah. I remember going to Helsinki's largest porn expo. And it was an interesting day out.
That must have been, yeah. I mean, what's that like? A porn expo
with
all the porn stars were there.
Yeah. It was an interesting one. It was. I mean, it was great, as you would expect. Everyone was very friendly. I was a little bit concerned about where some of the conversations were going. There was one of the main stars I was talking to, let's just say stars, and it was really weird because I had like her video like DVD cover like there, obviously with the images that you would expect, and then talking to her I'm like,
did she sign it for you?
but she seemed quite friendly, and I was like, I think I might need to leave.
That's because the Finnish guy just stand around and talking to them.
Honestly, it was exactly the same at the porn expo. It's just like, this guy's talking to me. He must be really super confident. But anyway, it was interesting, but all obviously all very, very, very nice, but it was very strange.
I guess if it's your job, it's just your job, isn't it? You know, that's what you do for a living. So
well, no one even told me. I was working for this Finnish tech company, and we had obviously mainly English clients. So Hustler Finland basically like cover a huge amount of our revenue. I was like, why did no one tell me this? Maybe I've got the story wrong. It was a while ago now, but it was. And again, all the guys who worked in the office, just really nice guys. I mean, you would be if you looked at porn all day, I guess. But
yeah.
But no, it was an interesting one. It was an interesting one. But it was a great experience. Not the Hustler thing, but the just the whole. Anyway, we're going back onto Finland again now.
Did your T-shirt have porn star in English or in Finnish?
In English.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd been given it by my brother-in-law, and he said, when you go to Finland, why don't you wear this? I said, I'll pack it, but I ain't wearing it. And then I did wear it for some reason. Anyway, but yeah, so we met on that. We just overlapped by one day, and that's how we met one another. And
but do you think if you weren't wearing that T-shirt, would you have met your wife, or would it have been different? Or do you think?
Don't know. But she definitely spotted me across the room and was like a bit of that.
This guy's actually talking. He must be the real deal.
It's English. He might be English. I'll give this a go. No, I don't know. She'd have to answer that. But we hit it off, obviously, and been together ever since. Yeah. Amazing. So that kind of happened, and then we lived abroad for a couple of years after that. We lived in Holland.
Okay. Whereabouts in Holland?
I was living in right by Café de Jaren, which is on the Amstel, right in the very, very most central bit, very near Dam Square. And I was on a road called Schravenlandsveer, and I was upstairs, had the apartment on the first floor there, which I got rinsed for a fortune by this Dutch guy. But it's very difficult to rent property in any Dutch city because they have the system where property is held for local people and artificially low prices. So it was only after when I was leaving I found out that what I paid as an expat for my apartment was more than what all the Dutch people in all the other apartments put together paid in order to rent, because it's a social housing model that they have for the whole city. That's why they have people of any income bracket can live right in the centre. It's not like, you go to large cities in the UK and the best bits are very expensive, and as you go further out, it gets cheaper or whatever. But I had a lovely flat there, and we lived there together, and we had a fantastic time. Holland's I don't know if you've spent much time there, but it's got a lot to commend it. Went everywhere by bicycle, and
Amazing.
And I was working for this design agency, and the Dutch are quite into their design.
Yeah.
They're actually quite serious about design and art, of course. So it's quite as a culture, that's something that they value. And then I came back to the UK, and I in fact I remember I had 2 job offers. I had one in London and one in Helsinki, and I sort of what we're going to do, and we came back to this country because I don't know, I missed it. I think by that point, been gone a while, and moved back to the UK and moved to Maidenhead of all places, and that's where our sort of family journey kind of started, and married and had children there, and became a local councillor. As we were talking about the other day.
Yeah, well, we've obviously got to dig into this, considering it's pretty pertinent on a day like today.
Is there much happening today in the political world?
I don't know. Have you heard anything? No. So
general election.
So I'm assuming we've all already voted today.
Well, polls close in an hour and a half. I think.
Yeah. So I guess it's. I guess we'll be. I don't know. I get quite excited. I quite like staying up and watching things progress. But no. But just before we get into the councillor thing, so when you moved back to the UK, so work-wise, you were still sort of in tech and digital and mobile.
I went back to Zed, the company I moved to London for a few years prior. They took me back. Lunatics. They said, if you're coming back, we'll hire you again.
Yeah.
Even though you left last time, we're still a bit annoyed. But like, if you are coming back, why don't you rejoin? So I just rejoined but in a more senior.
And what job were you doing?
So I was a product manager when I first started, and then I went back as a commercial lead on partnership accounts. Yeah, for them. So mainly in the media space. So partner director actually was the title, I think, back then. I remember it was good times, but I in Holland they have this thing called the 30% rule. So you don't pay taxes on the first 30% of taxes are rebated to you. So you actually pay a real term tax rate of maybe, as an expat, maybe 12%. 14%, and I was on a really good salary in Holland. So almost all my money was like living in Dubai for me. You know, almost all my earnings were, take home. We came back to the UK, and my God, the cost of living in London and the taxes. I just realised how much we pay in tax here. It's just, and it's got more, of course, but so I went back to the company I'd been in, familiar faces, and had a bit of time there. And I moved jobs twice in 2 years, and then I started my own business. I just thought, sod this, I just don't want to work for other people anymore. I just can't do it. I don't believe that these people I report to know more than I know. Got to that point in life, which I think we all get to at a certain stage. Adam's nodding, but where you just think, you know what, I am confident enough that I can do this. I don't have to just like kowtow to other people that I genuinely think don't know more than me. So I started my own business in 2007, and yeah.
And what business did you start?
It's a tech platform, streaming platform.
Okay.
Yeah, called Gorilla Box,
cool.
which we licensed to rights holders, advertisers, and brands. Yeah, for streaming. So we very early in the streaming space.
Right.
It was still in the days of download. At that point, 2007, it wasn't a lot of streaming going on. In fact, I spent a lot of time explaining to people what is video streaming. They're like, what do you mean, like download? Well, yes, but no. It's sort of like. So I did that, and it was a good time, good fun, challenging, very challenging doing startup. Where Adam's nodding, you know a bit about this.
Absolutely, it's yeah. I mean, obviously, I guess yours was more of a product play.
It was, yeah.
So different. I think very different ball game in many ways. I guess lots more startup investment, probably. Like a little bit, I suppose you were probably well versed actually, because a bit like I was, you were in the very early days of mobile. Yeah. And so obviously used to having to be at the beginning of the bell curve and trying to sort of, I mean, I remember I got into mobile, I think, why am I so sketchy on the dates? It's really odd. I can't remember if I was working for the Finnish company pre-iPhone or not, which was 2007-8.
Yeah.
And I think basically the Finnish platform we were working on was mobile web.
Right.
And I guess what you probably learned and I did is trying to sell something in its infancy, and in mobile was hard for a while, and then it just switched like a tap. It was like, but yeah, we were sort of very much on the mobile browser side, and so I do have the experience of that product side. But I think, for me, obviously being a service business, I think it's a bit different. But yeah, no, I mean it's amazing, but I mean, again, different conversation for another day probably, but no, I can imagine what it must have been like, streaming, building a platform. I can imagine it was intense.
It was high risk because you have to, like you said, you have to raise the money, get the investors, get them to buy into it. Looking back, I don't think any of them had any clue what I was talking about, but they gave me the money and then build the product. And it's quite high risk because you have to build it before you can make any money.
The hosting infrastructure to be able to support the stream.
Yeah, so you've got to hire the techies and get the developers in and scope it all out, and then literally buy the servers. And back then there was no cloud really, so you got to go and buy all these servers and put them into racks and install all the applications on them and make them work and test them and then sell that thing to people. And it was a really challenging thing to do, but. I still believed it could be done. It was, I'm quite a good salesperson. I can sell most, I'm confident in the sales context. But even I was like, gosh, people don't, it was so early in that space, and people were like, yeah, but why should I pay for this? Like, why do I need it? Should I sell fucking DVDs? Well, no, don't do that. This is better. Do this, I tend to think now, my view about it has changed a bit. I do actually genuinely think it's better to be a follower and just be really good at doing something that someone else has gone through the pain barrier on and proven, rather than be, like you said, at the beginning of the adoption curve where you're literally having to educate to sell. I think that was a big professional learning for me in that process. I think, if you look at some of the great products in history, they weren't the first, but they refined something that someone else had come up with and done imperfectly and then made it really bloody good. Yeah. And actually, I think that is a much smarter strategy to not have to be at the bleeding edge all the time.
Well, the iPhone, I mean, prime example, I suppose, isn't it? From a product perspective, I remember at the time when it came out, I had a phone that was equal in terms of features and functions. And I thought, well, why do I need the iPhone? And then someone showed it to me and I used it. I'm like, oh, okay, that's why I need the
Do you know, I rewatched that video recently, the product launch that Steve Jobs did of the iPhone, and because I stumbled upon a YouTube video which was only recently released of Steve Jobs, which was it was recorded. It was an interview that was recorded with him just after he'd left Apple the first time. And I just went down the rabbit hole on the Steve Jobs thing. I was like, oh, I'm going to go back and watch some of his stuff. Like, was he really as amazing as everyone says? And was he as much of a visionary? And I agree with you. At the time, I was like, Nokia rules the roost. How are you guys ever going to challenge Nokia? If you remember how they had 40% global share of the market. I mean, it was ludicrous how powerful they had become. But it was the focus on the user experience. It was just the absolute relentless focus on not just making it functional, making it enjoyable. And actually still, everything has copied that now.
It's a thing of beauty, just holding it, wasn't it? Before you even started using it, no stylus required.
In this thing, he says, and that to navigate this device, we're going to rely on something that every human has. Your finger. Yeah. And it was, if you remember the styluses, do you remember the Scion organizer and all this ridiculous plastic pen things? And then he was like, no, sod that. We're going to simplify this. We can do this better. We're Apple. And it's a great learning for anybody in tech to really think about the UX part, because it's about how does a human interact with a machine? How do you make that as easy as possible? And that is what happened. It's an amazing moment in history, period. Never mind just tech.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I keep challenging us on our business, thinking, are we really pushing the needle a little bit? Especially obviously with what's happening in AI. But I sit there and I think like I'll talk to my business partner or people who work with us. I'm like, are we just doing the same thing that we've been doing since 2015? And like, are we? And I think my conclusion is like, yeah, we are. But until I really see that there isn't a need for it, that we're not solving a problem, and also that until companies start adopting, because our biggest thing is that companies are still very much tech first, as in when they're building digital products or they're building whatever it is, whether it's enterprise IT or whether it's consumer digital, whatever, is they still make the same mistakes. So until that stops, I think, and to your point on, don't necessarily be first, but just be really good. And I'm challenging myself every day on that. But I do think you're right. But good on you for trying to go through that, that process, because I do know how it feels from being in the early days of mobile. And it was tough because it was like, like you said, that people would just look at you blankly like that. I don't understand what problem you're solving. It's like, well, it's really, really clear. It's this and it. And then they're like, yeah. And then all of a sudden one day it's like, then you're too late. And it's like, it just switches.
Yeah. I definitely think timing is a really big factor in those things, especially in the tech space. But anyway, I learned a lot, and I wouldn't be where I am in my career now if I hadn't done it. The bottom line is I wouldn't be an MD now if I hadn't become an MD of my own business first. So it was the proving ground that got me to be in the career role that I'm in. So even though obviously I didn't make millions and selling the business and all of that, I learned a lot, and I became a better professional person as a result,
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and following your career somewhat since then, you've had, and obviously we need to get into the councillor thing, but I think, your career since then, following it and keeping in touch with you has been awesome to see.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I think the one quick question though, which is a bit of a selfish one for me, because I do think about it, is I've always said I'd never want to get back into a corporate job, as in now owning my own business. And obviously right now, touch wood, things are good, but you never know, right? How did you find transitioning, going back from owning it into a job?
You know what, and I've done it back and forth a couple of times. It's challenging. It is challenging. And I actually worried that I was unemployable after having my own business, because I remember talking to one or two recruiters and them being told, look, just don't get your hopes up, because some businesses really steer clear of people who've had their own company because they think they're not going to be able to do what they're told, And I was very lucky. I was recruited into running Deezer in the UK, the music streaming app, as the UK MD, because Gerrit, the chief international officer, really valued entrepreneurship, and he said, I want entrepreneurs. In fact, he specifically said, I want failed entrepreneurs who have still got the hunger, because I want people who've, learned, struggled, but still want to get back up there. And I don't think I'd failed, but I'd been an entrepreneur and I'd got the scars, and I think he could see that, okay, this guy's he wants to go hard at it. And I had a really good grasp of streaming, of content, of rights, of publishing, of tech, of partnerships. It was just a perfect job for me at that moment. So I went into that actually in a positive way, and it was a fantastic experience. So I didn't have a huge adjustment, other than I think I had, after 7 years, sort of slightly lost touch of a contemporary kind of corporate environment. World had moved on a bit, if you know what I mean. I'd been doing things my way for 7 years, like structuring and managing everything, meetings, planning, budgets, everything, doing it my way. When you go into a very modern, fast-paced tech and content business, you suddenly shit, it's not the same as it was. You know, they do certain things differently. Even the language and the terminology had changed a bit. You know, so it was a bit of an adjustment. But like in terms of my sort of knowledge, I really was quite current and I knew how to do that. So I love disruption. I think disruption in business is a fascinating topic in any context, and streaming in music at that point was hugely disruptive. You know, it was changing the industry, and it was really only Deezer and Spotify were doing it in 2014, and it was really interesting to see how the record industry around us.
Was it that long ago? How is that so long ago? It feels like yesterday.
I remember signing up and waiting for Spotify to hit the UK because I couldn't wait to get involved. I mean, I've used it ever since. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, was it 10 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
I remember meeting you in your canteen. It was quite a cool building, if I remember.
Oh, in Hammersmith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, wow, this is amazing. I'm getting an insight into Deezer.
Yeah, it was cool, man. It was really cool. We had such a great time, a fantastic team, and it was real sort of, you know, we felt we were really purpose-led as a business. You know, we wanted to change things up, and that was what we talked about to ourselves all the time. And I just worked like an absolute Trojan. I was promoted to vice president. I had 10 countries. I had a massive P&L. I mean, it was great. It nearly killed me. I mean, I think I was burned out after 3 years of it. We used to we were backed by a company called a venture capital company called Access Industries, which is owned by a guy called Len Blavatnik, who's a kind of Ukrainian, like oil mogul, Russian-Ukrainian sort of one of these, you know, like billionaires. He owns Warner Music. And the way they ran the business was once a month, I think it was once a month, or maybe it was once a quarter, I can't remember. I think it was once a month. Every MD, they'd come to the UK office, and there'd be a couple of guys from the venture capital firm, and then the CFO from Deezer and the CEO of Deezer. They set up tables at the one side of a big room. In the offices where I was based, we had a really large meeting room. And then you had to go in, and on the big screen would be your numbers, and you'd have to present your numbers to the VC. And it was absolutely brutal. If you were not on your numbers, then you had to explain why, and then you had to explain what you were going to do about it to fix it. And the attrition rate of MDs was really high because the pressure was so high, and they wanted a to 100% revenue increase annually. So you had to double revenues every year. They wanted double. And I'm going off on one now, but it was I've never experienced that sort of corporate pressure before. You know, up in front of these four guys, very schoolmasterly, very like quite judgy, and you just stand there and account. And if your numbers were good, it was a short meeting. Right, great, well done. Off you go. Next. And it was, but if they weren't, it was real Alan Sugar.
Dragon's Den.
It was an Alan Sugar moment. And I got an insight into the world of venture capital, and I got to say, it's not a terribly attractive industry. All the people in it, I didn't fall in love with it. I've got to be honest. Yeah.
Did you find your experience with the lack of sugarcoating in Finland prepped you for the environment where you?
I'm not easily phased. It takes quite a lot to throw me off my, off balance. But I mean, I saw some guys practically reduced to tears in those meetings, and we all had to sit and watch each other. So it was a bit like a sort of a firing squad type of situation, because you all had to watch, and if someone crumbled, it's like, oh my God, this is awful. And you're watching this person sort of, they just go at you until it's like, okay, they psychologically won because you run out of stuff to say. Do you know what I mean? So that was the only aspect to it that I really didn't like, because I felt it was kind of gladiator style, you know. It was like it was just not an enjoyable kind of experience to have to do that.
Sounds like warfare interrogation or something.
It was, it really was, and it was brutal. But everything else about it was great. It was such a great job, and it was really well paid, and it was senior, and it was fast paced. And that was the tail end of my counsel at the time. I've been a counsellor all the way through having my own business, and still when I was at Deezer, and In fact, when I voted this morning, I used to do the exit counts. You know, when you're in elections, normally you have someone with a clipboard at the polling station, and they'll say to you, you know, would you mind giving me your voting slip, you know, with your name and address on it? And then they mark you off as having voted. They don't want to ask you how you voted, but they mark you off as having voted, so that when they're doing this thing called Get Out the Vote, GOTV, would drive around in cars to go to the places where we know someone's going to vote Conservative, to get them to leave their house, and if necessary, take them in the back of the car, drive them to the polling station, because we can see they haven't voted, and do an updated database of doing that. It's kind of tangent, but that's they weren't doing that this morning in my polling station. I think the Conservatives are just about given up, but used to do that.
Well, I guess so. I mean, obviously, there's other parts of your career we should get into, but one of the things that struck me the other day was when we caught up briefly, and just for the people listening, it's very kind of you, because we haven't caught up since my health stuff, and so I really appreciate you coming over.
No, but don't be silly.
It was great to catch up, and one of the things that was really, I really thought, and I actually said to Kat after you left, I was like, the guy started a business, had young kids, and was a councillor all at the same time.
Yeah, I did.
And I'm just thinking, actually thinking about the ins and outs of that, and I think that must have been nuts. But I guess to sort of start the councillor thing, because obviously I suppose you're in the midst of building a career. More than maybe building it, but you know you're right in the thick of it, and you're starting a family. So what was it that got you into the councillor gig?
Yeah. That's a really great question, and I have a memory of a number of things. I think I saw that there were aspects to life where I lived, in my street and in my town, which I thought could be better, and I wrote letters. And each time I wrote a letter, I either got no reply or I got a bullshit reply, and I thought,
which we're used to.
Yeah, I've had the same. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but
that's
yeah,
interesting.
You know, we've because the road out here, it's a 30, and both of us are just, you know, someone's going to die out there, because it's. I mean, obviously the listeners are not. You know, we're in a nice area, but that's a 30-mile-an-hour road, and people, it's like a motorway. I mean, it's terrifying, and. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, no, just 8 months later, you get a response saying, "Well, statistically, you know, it's not that bad." Well, yeah, if we've got young kids on the road, and you've got people flying down at 70 overtaking cars on the main road. Yeah, I mean, that was just one example, but yeah,
it's very straight, isn't it? I suppose that's why people go quickly, but it's obviously a built-up area, so I mean, it's clear it's a 30. Yeah, I think traffic's a big problem for a lot of people. It's weird to think that Google decides how many cars go down your street. You know, Google Maps. It's kind of weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
I often think that. Anyway, I like you. I wrote letters, and I wasn't satisfied with what I got back, and I just thought, you know what, I'm going to get elected, and I'm going to do these things because I'm sufficiently irritated about it that I'm going to do that, and I did. I applied. I said it was a Labour government at the time. But I applied and I said, I want to be a local councillor. How do I do it? And they said, well, first of all, you're about 40 years younger than everybody else. What the hell's wrong with you? But other than that, they said, well, like, okay, well, you can come down. And I had to go for selection. And it was a funny experience because there was a panel of people who chose who would, you know, get the chance to represent. This is just to be a representative, you know, to go for it, not to. Obviously, you have to be elected, which is a whole other thing. And he said to me, I'd like to hear your most formative political experience. What would it be? And can you describe it? And I said to him, well, I grew up in West Yorkshire when I was small during the miners' strike. And he said, okay. And I said it was a time of great unrest in the UK. I mean, the UK is quite a divided country now, but this is nothing compared to the time back then. I mean, that was off the charts. And the miners used to come around to people's houses and they used to ask for money because they were striking. They didn't have any money because they were broke. And this miners came to our door, and this happened a lot. Knocked on the door and they said, you know, can you give us some money? We're miners. We're striking to fight Margaret Thatcher. And my dad, who's I think it's fair to say it's pretty right wing, said, if you want money, go back to work. And that conversation ended just about there. Anyway, so closed the door. And I think it possibly took about 10 minutes before we got a brick through the window. And I remember thinking, that is not right. That is not normal, and that is not right. But it did make me, it was quite a formative experience. Anyway, I told them this story, and they said, God, you must be a really solid Conservative. You're in. So I joined as a Conservative, and I have voted Conservative on and off throughout my life. I didn't vote Conservative this morning, but I went in as a Conservative locally because that's where I felt the best opportunity to get elected and to get stuff done. And I went through that, and I knocked on doors relentlessly for many months, and I did get elected. And I was in a split ward of Boyne Hill. I had 2 Lib Dems and me, so it was split. But they were very nice. They were very nice people, and we, we worked the ward together, in the best interests of the people in that ward. And before I was coming over here tonight, I was like looking at some of the things that I did just to remind myself, because I mentioned them to you, Adam, the other day. I mean, I got £1 million for our local park, which we totally redeveloped. That was one thing in Maidenhead.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it was a crime and drugs hotspot, and we got it lit. We got a basketball court. Wow. We got a zip wire, a rebuilt play area, and we got it designed so that you could see in from the outside, so there weren't hiding places for people to take drugs. And got a cafe built. And that was in the days when central government used to give a lot of money out to local government, which they don't do now because of all the budget problems. I got the parking fixed. I inaugurated Maidenhead Half Marathon, which, by the way, is still going today and has 2,500 entrants every year. And I was checking them out on Instagram before I came over here. I was like, oh my God, I'm so happy about that. That was me. I did that.
What a legacy.
Yeah, it's cool, right?
Yeah, it really is.
Run it.
Yeah.
You should totally go and run it. It's in September. I literally was looking at. It's run by Purple Patch Running, who we hired to run it for us for the council.
Brilliant. Amazing.
So I basically, I was like you, exactly like you, and I got annoyed, and I thought the only way to fix this stuff is I'm going to get elected, and I got in, and then I really embraced it and did all the things I wanted to do and more.
And how much of your time was taken up per week? You have running a business and family time as well. How much time did it take up?
Oh, a lot. Yeah, like a lot. Probably. It's not every meeting is weekly. Some of them are monthly, but it would average out. It would average out probably 15 hours a week. Okay. I should think, all evenings, of course.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned earlier on about the long hours in the TV, and then the Deezer spell where you were working long hours, and then you kind of moved again, but you've accumulated different parts of the council that you're doing, and also the work as well. So you seems to be the spells where you work. You are working long hours, I guess.
Yeah, my wife says that it's a characteristic of me that if things get too easy, I just load my plate up with more stuff. Yeah, I've done that consistently throughout my life.
Yeah,
I don't know why.
And by the way, I think that was one of the things that when we were talking really made me think that we've got to sit down, because it's a real thing of mine right now. I mean, you hear me complain about it all the time.
Every day.
It's partly why we're doing this as well, is because I have this real issue at the moment. I guess it must be partly because of the health thing, especially. It's heightened it. Just this sort of expectation that it's all right to kind of finish a day, do something mediocre, then... I mean, I don't want to sound too judgmental here, because each their own, but... And then be like, right, now it's time for 4 hours of Netflix, and just not do anything valuable with that time. And I think that was really what I was just like, wow. Like, you've been... without blowing smoke up your ass too much, but it's it's you can see that from very early on you've had an intention, and I think that's why, even like we even discussed, I mean I'm obviously not hands on with politics right now, but I'm very, very active mentally and whatever with it. And a lot of the questions people ask me is like, well, what are you going to do about it? And it's like, well, what better thing could you do with your time than actually influence where you live and what you do? And so I think it really struck a chord with me. And tell me if this is too much of a personal question, but especially with young kids, I mean, surely there must have been a bit of resentment in the household, a little bit of sort of juggling with that, because I mean, you know, maybe, and by the way, that's not based on anything, but it's. I just wonder if, you know, being that busy, and that focused,
actually not as much of a problem as you'd think. And although I should tell you that my wife started her business the same month that I started my business. Wow. So she had a startup, I had a startup, and the council thing, and the thing. But what I used to do is I used to say to her, look, I've got to go out canvassing now for 4 hours. I'm take the kids with me. And I had a backpack, which you could put a baby in. You put a baby in backpack and another one on the stroller, and off I went. And actually, without sounding too cynical about it, they were great icebreakers. I mean, you go to the front door and so some Mrs. Miggins, and she opens the door and you say, look, I'm canvassing, like about to close the door. And then you say, oh, but you've got these two lovely blue-eyed little blonde girls with you, and that's nice. And the number of times I was invited into people's homes and I managed to talk about politics, but because I had my children with me, it literally, figuratively and actually opened doors everywhere. And no one, and people commented on it all the time. It's like, oh yeah, you came around the other day with your baby. Yeah, I remember you, lunatic. You know,
really? That's amazing. It's amazing. It's a great approach.
But it's also, by the way, it's really interesting because my parents, they asked me who I voted for today, and obviously I said that back. And they said, we voted for the only guy who came over and had a cup of tea.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Right.
And, you know, but so do you know what I mean? It's such a good tactic. And I sort of, when my mum sent me that, I sort of sniggered a little bit. I was like, you can't vote for someone just on that.
But it's more real. It brings it to life.
Then I
thought
about it all day. I'm like, actually, it's probably exactly what you should do.
Yeah. We Theresa May was our local MP at that time. She was just an MP because the Conservatives weren't in government. But she was very hot on the human touch, you know, like actually showing up at people's doorsteps, showing them that you're active, showing them that you're listening.
She is notoriously good for that, isn't she?
That's her big shtick. And she drilled us on that locally because she'd started as a local councillor and then moved up to MP. A lot of people follow that path because the structure of local government reflects national government in the way it works. So it's quite a good proving ground, you know. And I worked the streets of Theresa May. Sounds so wrong.
Were you wearing your porn star t-shirt?
God, I can't believe I said that.
I've got some really weird images.
Back in Amsterdam. Theresa May.
Back in Helsinki, Hustler.
Oh, brilliant. I literally canvassed with Theresa May, just to restate that, many times and learnt a great deal. And but no, she was fantastic, and she also
brilliant stories. I was telling a story in the House of Commons. I think it was when the Queen died. It was absolutely incredibly delivered. I mean, I think she's
very statesmanlike.
Yeah, she was fantastic.
So I learnt a lot from her. She'd also taught me the Colombo move, which is you won't know this if you haven't been a councillor, but when you go out canvassing, what you do is, of course, you're handing out your literature, you're trying to listen and understand and you know, listen to their issues, because that's where you hear, like you guys are talking about the 30-mile-an-hour thing. That's where you'd learn, because they say, actually, there is something that's really doing my head in. It's this. Okay, fine. I'll see if I can do something about it. And but what you're also trying to do is update your database of voter intention. And some people won't tell you what their voter intention is. It's quite a private matter. But if you've built a bit of a rapport, you can do it. But the way to do it is to do it, if you want to be successful at getting that information, is just to do it kind of like, oh, by the way, you know, and it actually gets called the Colombo move, because the detective Colombo. So as you walk up to the thing and you're talking to them at the thing, you finish the conversation. Oh, it's great to meet you. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really insightful. I'll leave my contact details if there's anything else, you know. And you start turning around and say, oh, by the way, how do you normally vote? Is it Labour, Conservative? Oh yeah, it's Conservative. Great, brilliant. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon. And that is a standard thing that you do, because if you knock on the door and say, how do you vote?
Yeah.
You won't tell me.
Defence mechanism.
The barriers go up. But if you smile and you get to know them a bit, and you've got a 2-year-old in a pushchair, and then just as you're turning around, you go, by the way, would you like thing? And 9 times out of 10, it works. And that's Theresa May taught me that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, she was incredibly skilled on the doorstep. And
so I have to admit, because she got a lot of stick, but I was actually in a butcher's in Maidenhead. I can't remember which one. And it was when she was PM, and there was all the Land Rovers outside, all the security guards. But she walked in, and I was like, do you know what? I've got a lot of opinions about this woman. And actually, I just saw how she interacted with people, actually being up close with her, watch how she dealt with the shop staff. And I was just like, she seems like a really nice woman.
Yeah. And a very committed public servant. Like, absolutely committed to the idea of public service. Not in it for the career, not the money, not the nothing, none of that. She really believed in the value of representing the public and trying to do the best you can for them. Honestly, I don't think she was PM material. I think she wasn't just quite at that level, but she was a wonderful working MP, and she was good in cabinet as Home Secretary too. So I got to know her really well, and her husband, and and learnt a lot from her.
You mentioned earlier on about when you were working the TV and you were going around doing the outside broadcast and interviewing people on the streets. Did that kind of experience help? I know you've done a lot since then, but when you're canvassing on the doorsteps, you're quite well versed in stopping people in the street and speaking to them. Did that kind of
That's
help?
a really good point. I hadn't thought about that, but yes, I think that's true, because as I was saying to Adam when we met the other day, it takes quite a lot of gumption to knock on someone's door, a total stranger. You're putting yourself out there quite a bit by doing it in the first place, and say to them, look, I'm this person. This is what I stand for. I want your vote, and I'm going to try and do these things. Will you vote for me? Yes or no? And I think a lot of people wouldn't be comfortable to even try and do that. It's quite demanding, kind of emotionally and psychologically, to do that.
If you get rejections as well.
Oh yeah, and you do, and you get told, you get some not so nice things said to you. I used to think about it like sales. I used to think, I'm here and I'm selling something. But I'm not selling a product or a service. I'm selling me.
Yeah. And
that's the way I used to look at it, and that enabled me to sort of make it a bit more of a distance, so it wasn't upsetting if someone or other not so nice things. But honestly, generally, even if people didn't vote for you, they were quite civil. Most people would just go, do you know what, mate? I'm dyed in the wool Labour, and I'm never going to change. So I appreciate you knocking on my door, but no, thank you. And just close the door. It's fine. Okay, that's cool. It was very rare that you'd have a conversation with someone and they'd start as a Labour supporter and you turn them. It's very, very rare.
Yeah.
That doesn't. The swing vote is so small, actually, when you think about it, in this country. I mean, it's there's not many people that could flip from one to the other. Most people are just like, they just vote the same way their whole lives.
It's going to be really interesting this election, though. Do you feel this is a bit different, or?
I do.
Yeah,
I do. I think there's a lot of very unhappy people and a lot of very frustrated people, and I'm one of them.
Yeah. I think for me, I have no idea how it's tracking or what the polls are saying, but I mean, this area is as Tory as it gets. I mean, I don't think I've ever lived. I've lived here a long time, and it's never not been Tory. It's just an assumption, and you can even hear, you can feel some. I mean, you probably are closer to it than me, but it just feels there's a real Lib Dem swing around here right now.
Right. Okay.
But again, it might just be from the anecdotal conversations I've had. But no, it's just. I mean, for me, I think I said this the other day. The last 4 years has completely shifted. It's taken a lot of adapting mentally and politically, I think, and I think a lot of people are feeling the same thing. But I mean, also I mean, it's really interesting you brought up the miners' strike and that period, actually, because I think people forget how much this country does go through, over periods of time. I mean, that was obviously a really, really divisive and tough time.
It's like so much worse than anything we have at the moment. It's really funny to hear people talk about, it's like the world is ending. It's like, guys, the unemployment situation was in double digits, back then. I mean, it was, they had people who were, whole councils that were openly full communists. I mean, it was like the IRA. I mean, it was the situation in the UK. I mean, the society was hanging by an absolute thread.
Winter of discontent.
I mean, there were. They wouldn't collect dead bodies or litter. I mean, it was the rubbish was piled up in the streets. I mean, it was just indescribably worse than anything we have today. But I think the social media amplification of it has had a real. Yeah. It's like the whole echo chamber thing, and bad news sells, and people want to tell bad news stories. And in my feeds on all my things, it's constantly, why is the economy doomed in the United Kingdom ? 100,000 views in the last 24 hours. People are like gravitating into this negative
rubbernecking, isn't it? Yeah.
Story. It's really disappointing, and it's I remember the interviews a few months ago. The Nissan UK MD, who's just committed to building this massive EV factory in Sunderland, saying. He wasn't from the UK, he was from outside the UK, but he said just baffled by how British people talk down their own prospects and their own country so much. He said, I've never known a country where people are so downbeat on themselves. Like, it's really become a symptom of the 21st century in the UK, and I'm baffled by it because there's so many things to be positive and optimistic about, and fundamentally there's ways. Any problem has a solution. It might not be comfortable or quick or cheap, but there are solutions to all of these challenges. And this is one thing that I've really noticed about these two campaigns, the Labour and the Conservatives. It's been very transactional. They've just talked about tax, or they've just talked about the NHS. There's no vision. There's no.
I totally agree.
There's no purpose-led, story of like, let's talk about the big picture. Like, what is the role of the United Kingdom in the world? And what kind of country do we want to be in 10 years?
Yeah, let's innovate and lead the way from a technological standpoint or a sustainability standpoint, where there's nothing. It's so short-termism,
it's
isn't it?
just literally about the immediate problems we're in right now.
And what's popular and what's gonna get us attention.
Yeah.
And what's everyone,
how do we win?
Yeah, exactly.
As a nation, what are we gonna? What do we want to be really bloody good at and really successful at, and how are we going to get there? But there's so little mission-based statements from anybody sort of senior. It's like they don't even want to. Why does Donald Trump get traction? He has a 4-word slogan: "Make America Great Again," and he just says it over and over and over again, and it's anyone can understand it.
Well, and sorry to interrupt, but his mission is to just be very America focused.
Yeah.
So again, whether or not you believe in it, whatever, I get told off all the time for explaining about like why it's not as simple as just screaming about how bad Donald Trump is, because what he's doing makes a ton of sense.
Yeah,
like, absolutely, like you said, it's mission led, and it's going to appeal, whether people think it's contrived, whatever. It's going to appeal to people who are passionate about fundamental basics.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not at all fighting his corner. I think he's a pretty disgusting guy. But it's like, I also totally, I suppose I put myself in a slightly more political realist sort of environment. I think what he's doing is perfectly smart.
And how he's doing it is actually very. I'm also think he's a pretty loathsome character, but how he's doing it is very clever. I don't know if you've heard this story, but he. They did a lot of research on a lot of the voters across the United States outside of the urban areas, and as you probably know, most Americans don't live in big cities; they live in small towns, and they analysed the likely Republican vote that he has a chance of winning, especially across the South, and they established that the majority of those people only use a day-to-day vocabulary of 900 words. Have you heard this story?
No.
So, they're not the most articulate, I think it's fair to say. And they said, right, from now on, any speech you deliver will only use these 900 words. We're never going to use any complex words in any of our speeches because we want to appeal to the people that we believe are going to vote for us and simplify everything. Now, and as a result of that, this is really smart. I mean, it sounds ridiculous.
It's quite easy when your competitor can't even speak properly. So,
yeah,
so there's that. I had to get that in, but sorry.
Yeah. But this was the Hillary Clinton days. She's a graduate and she's a lawyer and she's super smart and she talks about, she'll give speeches where she talks about the shifting tectonic plates of geopolitics. But if I work on a ranch in Missouri, like how much do I understand about that? So he knows his customer and he's preaching really effectively to that. I get your point, and I think it's really bizarre that Joe Biden is still in the race. He's very obviously got dementia.
It's really sad.
It's really sad.
I guess they're just keeping him there as a figurehead.
But again, what that story is fantastic because it's it. I hate to say it, it's just kind of smart.
It's clever.
Exactly what you just said is it's knowing your audience, it's knowing the problem you're solving, and I think this is really a good point you make, which is this country it just feels a bit rudderless. It's like what do we actually hit? What are we doing here?
Yeah.
I think he even called it out a few years before he ran for presidency, didn't he? If I ever did run for presidency, I would do X, Y, Z. He appealed to Fox News Brigade, switch to be a Republican, and like you say, appeal to the rhetoric or the language. I mean,
language is the thing. I mean, it's that's the key to unlocking all of this stuff. But I really feel that what inspires people is not to talk about problems. That's the thing. That is not what inspires people. People are inspired by the potentiality of a country and where it could be and why that is a great story and why you should believe in that. But we've got this behavior in government now in this country which is corporatist. It's basically like a country run by McKinsey's, because the whole approach is entirely consultative. You have a problem, you solve that problem, you put resources onto it, you manage it until it's solved, and then you move on to the next one. And it's just, you move on from problem to problem and solution to solution. Well, that's great, but that's not what gets people out of bed in the morning. That's not what makes people excited. Politics, if that's all it was, well, you just give it to loads of administrators. Yeah. That's not what we're going to the polling booth for. We're going for this bigger picture, this bigger story. But the weird thing is that in the corporate landscape in this country, everything is obsessed with purpose, mission, vision, values. That's all anyone talks about. But yet you go to the government and nobody's talking about it. It's like it's imbued in everything we're told about senior leaders in business that, you need to have you want to get Gen Z on the payroll and get them to believe in it. You've got to focus on values. You've got to focus on the mission. You've got to make them believe in it. Well, I'm ranting now. But there's absolutely none of that in our national government. There's not one shred of it. It's all tactical. Well, we'd change national insurance like this, or we'd increase the number of beds in the NHS like this. But that's not what people want.
100%.
You mentioned earlier about the timing as well. When Tony Blair came in, was it 98?
7.
He came in, he rode that wave of kind of 90s, pop culture, and it just seemed that it was a different. He tackled it in a different way, didn't he? I think.
But he was inspiring. He was a really, he was a really inspiring leader. He called Britannia, and he managed to sell a story about this country, not just back to the British people, but to people outside of the UK.
Speaking in French in European Parliament.
He was very international in his own behaviours, but we completely lack that now. There's nobody in the political scene that you look at and you think, wow, if only that person was the leader, because I'm really inspired by.
I can't think of one person.
No,
I can't think of one person who would even get me close to, It's frightening.
Especially for the younger generation, the kids that are coming to be voting in the next few years. Who are they going to connect with?
Exactly. And I think going back to your personal situation, I mean, what do you feel are your biggest takeaways? You know, what did you learn from that experience? You know, did you leave that thinking, actually, do you know what? There's a lot more good going on here than people might think. You know, what are the sort of and maybe I'm putting you on the spot and you haven't really thought about it, but it's you know, what would you say? Let's say, you know, were there any inspiring things in that process for you?
Well, first of all, it was a hugely enriching experience, and I'm really glad I did it. And you learn a lot about how things actually work, the mechanics of how things are managed locally in schools, and you know, I mean, refuse collection, you know, basic things that everyone relies on that you, when it's working, you never think about. But believe me, if it didn't work, you'd think about it a lot. So you know, I learned a lot about that. I became a school governor. I chaired the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for about 5 years, which is there's a lot of committees, but it's the committee at the top of all the other committees, and all their reports go to you, and then you review them and scrutinise and make sure money gets spent properly, and it's all audited and it's done in an appropriate way. So I really had an incredibly thorough grasp of how the whole thing worked in the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead, where I was a councillor. And I would recommend it to anybody. I would absolutely 100% recommend it to anybody, because it's there. And anybody, when friends of mine said to me at the time, God, I can't believe you did that. I'm amazed you did that. And I said back to them, I'm amazed that you're amazed, because there's no us and them in a democracy. It's just us. There is no them, it's us. We're it. You know, there's no one else coming to the rescue. If you want to change something, then you need to go and change that thing. There's no cavalry, you know, waiting that fortunately is going to solve your problems. So, you know, I think there's a lot of the potential ownership for anybody that wants to have an impact on things.
And just quickly on that point, so I listened to a podcast this morning that I thought was a really interesting question about the media, which is that the media seem to have forgotten its place. As in, when I mean the media, I mean effectively news or reporters. Is if you actually think about what their job is to do or to be, is to be the voice of the people, and then to hold the people in power to account. That was sort of typically their role. And if you think actually what's happening now is that the media is very much a voice for either corporate or central government. You know, if you think and that's really interesting, because I wonder if that's why people are getting so disengaged with politics, is because it doesn't feel like that. There seems such a big disconnect now between, I mean, look, you look at Rishi Sunak, right? His wife is obviously the daughter of the owner of Infosys. He's obviously got the background that he's got. They're incredibly wealthy, right? So it feels like they're out of reach to a huge amount of people. And I'm wondering, because also you sound like a very data, like, as soon as you start to mention committees and audits, and it just terrifies me. Right? Like, so you sound like you're quite comfortable with that sort of analytical data sort of driven side. I don't know if that's.
I had to learn, like anyone else, had to learn it and to chair it. I was chairing it. So I mean, these enormous, literally, I'm not joking, hundreds of pages of reports that you had to understand to be able to scrutinise them. And I could call anyone, including the chief executive, to my committee and say, on page 426, clause 6, you've said this. It doesn't add up. Why? Or where is this report? Why is it late? Or what are we doing about it? The job was to scrutinise. So it was the tough panel that everyone dreaded, and I chaired it for years. I mean, I really learnt my onions about, you know, I mean, like the big areas of expenditure are mainly adult social care. That's the big shocker, because, you know, it takes one person to move into your borough that needs 24-hour care. That's probably £100,000, and you didn't plan for that in any budget. If you have 10 of those, then that's £1 million that you didn't have. So managing that was hugely challenging. But I to go back to your point anyway, I definitely recommend it, and I agree. He's he's from a kind of an elite, really. I mean, how much does he really know about the problems of ordinary people? I don't know. He's lived a different sort of life.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it wasn't actually necessarily to pick on him. I think he's been given a tough gig.
He came too late. I think what he was handed was such a basket of excrement. By that point, after the Liz Truss thing, what if it shat gold bricks, it probably wouldn't have made any. I think it was just there's too much fatigue, there's too much baggage. People are like, do you know what, guys?
Yeah.
Boris had just gone as well. It's like Partygate and all that kind of
Yeah.
But I think what it represents to me is a general disconnect. I mean that is just, I just find it staggering that the Tories just find it so difficult to connect with people, and this brand of Tory, it's just,
But I'm not sure the Labour are that much better, though.
No,
I really don't. I don't. I mean, I didn't vote for either of them.
Me neither.
I voted, for the record, I voted Green Party because I think the climate crisis out is more important than any of this stuff personally. But I don't. I think the whole system and the situation and the people and the mechanisms are not of the 21st century, and it's. What is needed actually is a new party.
Yeah,
it's something, a completely fresh
approach.
Yeah,
something that connects with the younger generation. That's more visionary.
Yeah, and sells a vision of the future in a sort of compelling and meaningful way that people can actually understand and
get behind.
I mean, Macron is failing now, I know, but when he created En Marche, that is what he did. He was actually pretty successful 7 years ago. He was like, do you know what? I'm not going to join any of you guys. I'm not going to be on the left wing or the right wing. I'm going to create this completely new entity, and we're going to go for it. And I believe...
What's happened to him? It's like, like changing the pension age without even due process. I mean, that's what I love about the French, is they go and start burning cars because he does that.
Yeah. the Gilets Jaunes brigade. Yeah. I don't know. I think he's...
It's like Trudeau. He's gone completely nuts.
Has he?
Oh, totally nuts, in my opinion. Anyway, well, look, amazing to share that experience. I mean, and I do think, honestly, fair play to you. I mean, I think it's amazing to see someone who's put their sort of money where their mouth is in terms of, actually being like, right, this isn't, I'm getting wound up. I need to go and do something about it and doing it. I think that's really, really remarkable. And we could carry on talking about your career, but I think we need to wrap things up a little bit. So, for me, I think, like I said, the takeaway from this conversation that's just been so fantastic is, just learning about decisions, even just down to, even just the language that you've done with your kids. I think it's fantastic. And I think there's a lot that people listening can learn from decisions and steps you've made. And I think also with the councillor thing, like I say, for me, when we were talking about it the other day, it was just to get that insight was really, really helpful, very inspiring. So thanks for sharing the story. It was really.
It's actually not. There's nothing that out of the ordinary about it. I really commend anybody and everybody to have a crack at it. And even if you're not successful, you'll have learned a lot about yourself and the experience in the doing of it. But I gained a huge amount from that, and I definitely would do it again. I mean, I would consider doing it again now if I had the time. And so if you guys or anybody that listens to this feels strongly enough to want to change things and believes in a localism agenda, then I recommend going and getting elected. And actually, the system is not there to thwart you. Yeah, it's slow and it's a bit, plodding, and there's a lot of process, but ultimately you can get things done and you can change things, and I did, and so I'm confident that anybody could if you wanted to. So I would really encourage, and the other thing that there's needed, of course, is that younger people would do that, because actually a lot of them are practically fossilized, right? And I mean, that's not good, because their understanding of contemporary Britain is sort of not very up to date, and it means that the representation that people get at a local level isn't that fantastic, because you're being represented by people who are of a totally different generation.
More diversity, younger people coming in.
Yeah, you need a mix.
Yeah.
It's like business. Businesses that are diverse in their workforce are generally more successful than businesses that are not.
Exactly.
Why? Because you have different points of view and you have an engaged and varied debate. And that is very lacking. If you went to any local council meeting anywhere in England and Wales on the monthly meetings that they all have across the country, they're mostly elderly, white males in the majority of cases. So, and that's been fine, but I think we could do better, and I think it would be good if we did. And for some reason, people don't feel motivated. Well, guess what? Actually, you choose how many hours you do. You also get a small salary. It's not much, but I mean, you get a bit of money, a bit of pocket money as well, which is nice. And you'll learn a huge amount, and you may change things for the better.
Yes, I agree with you completely. And there's a really interesting book by Matthew Sider on the power of diversity and diverse teams. I don't know if you've read that or not, but it's really interesting. No. Yeah. But yeah, thank you very much, Christian. It's great to meet you. I really enjoyed hearing your story. I had to give me a little bit of a snippet, but I think you purposely held it back just so we could have a fruitful chat today, which I think we have. It's great to meet you and hear your story. And
thank you.
Very inspiring. And I think there's some great messages in there all the way through, in terms of not just sitting back and whinging and moaning about stuff. Just go, get out there and make a difference. And I think it's really, lots of good messages. And just to conclude, we always conclude with the same question, Christian. So. You've had lots of experiences, lived abroad, and lots of experiences in business and being a councillor and everything like that, which is fantastic. But if you could go back to yourself just before you boarded that plane to Africa, back in the day after A-levels, and give yourself one piece of advice based on everything you've learned over the last few years, what might that be?
Take risks.
Yeah.
Because life's too short not to.
Brilliant. And take a Pawn Star t-shirt in your backpack.
And marry a Finnish wife.
Great message.
Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Great way to end.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Great to have you on, Christian. Thank you.
So real, I'm healed. Are you crushing up another pill? Let's never ever go to sleep again. Wait, I think I'm starting to fade again. I don't want this.